Hello and welcome back to episode 4 of Red in the Face. Today we're going to talk about should billionaires exist. The motivation for this episode comes from the fact that Jeff Bezos, CEO of Amazon, is reported to become the world's first trillionaire by 2026. Before we get started, I just want to do a shout out thanking everyone for their support so far. You can find the pod on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Cast and YouTube. Please like, subscribe, review, and just spread the word on any platform you can. Hope you enjoy the episode.
This is Lord, this is Allah. This is the oppressed, this is the oppressed, this is the exploited, this is the exploiter.
Hierarchy as it exists in the family. Hierarchy as it exists in the school.
Is it right that so many people live in such poverty in a society surrounded by such riches? No, it obviously is not.
Because of the way this society is organized, because of the violence that exists on the surface everywhere, you have to expect that there are going to be such explosions. You have to expect things like that as reactions.
So, as I said, Jeff Bezos is set to become a trillionaire. That's according to certain projections and reports that he's going to become a trillionaire by 2026. Either way, if that's not fact, and that's definitely not going to happen, it still speaks to the fact he has a ridiculous amount of money that he hasn't earned. So can anyone get their head around the fact that someone on this planet can actually potentially be worth $1 trillion?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say that just to put into context how astounding this amount of money is. Right, 1 million seconds is 11 and a half days, right? 1 billion seconds is 31 and 3/4 years, and 1 trillion seconds is 31,710 years. Who needs that amount of money? Who needs that amount of money? What are you doing with it?
The perfect one I saw was there was a guy on TikTok who did it, who represented Bezos through grains of rice, and he just took the pile out of his. I think he's bought an £80 million home in New York, and just took the pile of rice out, and it was literally about 6 strange, and he just dropped it back over there, and he was like, "Oh, he's still got this massive pile of money over here." It's just absolutely batshit.
I think We tend to say that amount of wealth is, when people are trying to justify that amount of wealth, they say it's based on hard work, right? That they work a certain amount and therefore it's justified. Purely from a rational standpoint, how much is let's say, what's the average British wage? 25k, is it? Something like that?
I think it's about 21 or 22 grand, I think, on average.
Yeah, I think it's 22,000 pounds a year, something around that.
Yeah, so if we say, how much is Jeff Bezos worth? Let's say 100 billion. He's not. He's worth a lot more, but let's say it's that much. If you divide that by, sorry, I'm doing some maths on here, but that is, so his wealth is 4,554,455 times higher than the average wage of someone in the UK. So you're telling me that he works 4.5 million times harder than a nurse or a teacher or whatever, anyone who earns an average wage.
Exactly.
There is
no current crisis.
Yeah, and that's projecting it. Let's say maybe I've done the maths wrong. I don't know. I typed a lot of zeros, but even if it's wrong, it's up there, right? It's a lot. It's a lot of money. So are we saying that there is any work that is worth that much more than any other work? There isn't, and the logic is ridiculous. But yeah, I just thought it was a good way of showing how.
No, yeah. I mean, I had down that. So the average. So obviously, him being American, the average income of a full-time worker in the US in 2018 was about $46,000. So that means if that person spent no money and just earned that, it would take them 21,000 years just to accumulate £1 billion. And we're talking about, not that obviously there's a lot of discussions about Jeff Bezos on whether this is actually going to be $1 trillion or not, but just to earn $1 billion, as the average US full-time worker, you'd have to work for 21,000 years, never mind 100 billion, if not more, which just shows that there's no way that that level of wealth can be in any way what you would describe as earned, bought and paid for, whatever.
Yeah.
It is crazy. I mean, in a UK context, there's around 150 billionaires in the UK. There's 5 billionaire families that hold the same amount of wealth as around 20%, the bottom 20% of the population, just to show like the sheer numbers. And like people talk about Jeff Bezos, his wealth is higher than a lot of countries' GDPs and stuff like that. It's a crazy amount of money, which we'll talk about, but in terms of how you come to accumulate that sort of wealth. But just I think people get lost in the numbers. I mean, I think it might be a Stalin quote of like 1 death's a tragedy and 1,000 deaths is a statistic. If it didn't say it, I apologize.
Lies.
But either way, that works in this context. After you go past a certain amount in which the human brain can't fathom that size, once you get over having £1 million, I don't think normal people can't envisage what that means, like physically, because if you gave any of us £100,000, it would radically change our lives forever, because what we could do with it, never mind having 1 million, 10 million, 100 million, 1,000 million, 1 billion, whatever.
Yeah. Just going back to what I was talking about, how people kind of justify these levels of wealth, talk about how it's based on hard work. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because how talking about how we define hard work, what does Jeff Bezos actually offer society? And one of the things they talk about is creating jobs. And so I did some more math on the amount of jobs that Amazon, the amount of people that Amazon employs is something like 850,000 people, and they're all on an average wage of $50,000 a year or something, which seems like a lot of money, but in America, I think it's not as much because they have to cover the costs of like healthcare and stuff. So $50,000 isn't the same as £50,000. Well, literally, it's not anyway. But
how far it goes is very different.
Yeah, the point being the amount that they pay out to people every year is something like, I worked out, something like 40 billion. So it's like earns personally, as one person at the top of the company, earns 4 times more than the entire rest of the business does on average. Like it's just insane. Like not on average, sorry, as a total, he earns 4 times more than the total amount that they all earn.
I think it's
just insane to me.
It's definitely far better to measure his worth in how many bottles of piss he's caused his employees to use. And you know, that sounds quite flippant, but you know, you don't get to the money that Jeff Bezos is on without causing people, you know, without having horrific effects on your workers. You know, you have to cut corners somewhere to get to even $1 billion. I say even $1 billion, like, oh, it's nothing. But I mean, compared to Bezos, it is nothing. You have to just completely mistreat workers.
Well, yeah, I mean, on that, that's the important sort of place to move to, really, is the fact that, okay, this is a ridiculous amount of money in which, I mean, yeah, the good you could do with it, the things you could do with it. But the idea that goes back to is the argument you'll get a lot is, oh, well, this is, you know, hard work. Jeff Bezos is an entrepreneur who had an idea and it grew and grew and grew. And it's, you know, he's now sat on the fact that he actually only takes a salary of $80,000 a year out of Amazon, but because he is the controlling shareholder, he just gets all the share dividends. So that's where he makes all his money from. People will say, well, he's worked hard to grow this business. And I mean, that's something to, you know, we could all talk about now, is that a lot of these companies, to get this sort of wealth, have exploited workers and have, you know, productive capitalists make their money through exploitation, paying workers a wage below what they would deserve. You know, the best example I ever heard is, you know, if you have a piece of wood and then it gets turned into a table, who creates the wealth there for when that table gets sold on? The worker creates that wealth. It's just the fact that, you know, the guy that owned the factory gets sort of 95% of what that wealth is rather than the worker.
Mark, Scott, JPEG.
as well as that, so Amazon's money is in stocks, right? So it's not even what they're actually worth, because Amazon make a loss, right? They make tremendous losses every year. It's what rich people think they're going to be worth. So the reason that people are dying in America of coronavirus to go back to work is because the rich people, one day Amazon might make this amount of money, or whichever business might make this amount of money. They predict a long way off that, oh yeah, this has the potential to earn that. It's not even like actual figures. And I mean, it wouldn't be a base if it is, but it's so much more callous that it's just like almost an intellectual gambling game with them. People, the stock market gambles in terms of money, but they're actually gambling with lives as well. They're gambling with people's livelihoods.
Yeah, the global economy is just a casino. It's basically what it is. But it's not. It's a casino in which the people whose lives that get sort of wrecked the most aren't the people who sat at the table playing the game. It's the people on the Amazon in the warehouses, etc. I noted down a few examples of James talked about staffers in Amazon warehouses having to pee into bowls to avoid taking time away from their job to use the restroom, because you'd basically have quotas of how many things you have to get off the shelves in the warehouse in a certain time. And obviously, if you take loo breaks, that's eating into that time, so you get punished by bosses. So you have to process a package every 9 seconds from 7:30 to 6 p.m. Those who struggle to keep up with the 300 item an hour workload sometimes suffer panic attacks. 55% of employees at Amazon said they were criticised for taking sick days. Female workers claimed they were penalised for taking time off during pregnancy. A transgender woman sued the company, alleging she kept getting called a chick with a dick from management. All these horrible, disgusting practices that what they're doing is extracting money from these people, making them work harder and harder and harder for less and less and less. And that money just gets sucked all the way up to the top, to Jeff Bezos.
At this point as well, I really want to say that obviously it's closed now due to COVID-19, but the Museum of Neoliberalism has a really good, I think they have an online exhibit and a in-person exhibit. It's somewhere in London, but it's definitely worth checking out. They have a lot of information on this exact thing. Like literally, Amazon warehouses, they have some of the gadgets that the workers have to have on their arm that buzz when they're under their targets, basically. So I think his Instagram is spelling mistakes cost lives. He does a lot of art. It's just really good. I think it's just worth checking out, just to reiterate that point.
Sounds like something from some dystopian novel or something, doesn't it?
There's a Panorama documentary as well, where a guy went undercover working for Amazon, and he could hear those beeps in his sleep, like the beeping to say that you missed the timing.
So these people work a hell of a lot harder, don't they? Really, than people like Jeff Bezos, who I imagine at this point has. I mean, this is purely an assumption, but I would imagine that he doesn't have much to do with even the day-to-day running of the business at this point. He just owns he owns that he has the majority share in Amazon or whatever, so he makes his wealth based on that, not on any kind of hard work.
But if he sat and did nothing for the next month, literally nothing, and Amazon ran into the ground, then he'd still be fine. He would earn enough money in that month off the speculative sort of market that's it. That'd be him done. Whereas workers, if they we've proven with COVID-19, if you don't work for a month, then you're on the breadline, and that's pretty much it. I don't know if anyone else had any examples. I mean, we're focusing a lot on Amazon because obviously the Jeff Bezos stuff, but he's certainly not the only person that people's fire should be sort of aimed at in terms of exploiting workers to extract the wealth that these people do, work really hard. I mean, one of the worst of the worst is obviously Apple. Apple, who forced workers to sign anti-suicide pledges as there was a rise in worker suicides in their sweatshops in China, because obviously they had horrific working conditions. So Apple made them sign contracts being like, please don't kill yourself, otherwise we won't pay out basically to your grieving family. These conditions that people were killing themselves over were making people work 98 hours of overtime in a month, having one day off in every 13, publicly humiliating badly performing workers, and then making people live in dormitories of 24 people. And that's to create, this new millennium products of the iPhone and the iPod, etc., for this hippie-loving Steve Jobs, who everybody thinks is this great guy, but they're doing some pretty horrific things to get. That's what what these companies do to get that wealth.
Do we want to talk a bit about? I'll be interested to see what you guys think about, like, why these people are okay with it, like why billionaires or very wealthy people are okay with hoarding wealth. Because there's a website out there where you can pretend to be one of these people. I don't know who it is. You pretend to be like Mark Zuckerberg or some billionaire. You pretend to be them, and then you get all your total wealth on one side, and then all the most expensive things in the world that you can buy if you want. And you can't. You play it, and you can't actually spend the amount of wealth that you have. It's like, even if you buy the most luxurious, even if you buy friggin', I don't know, boats and small islands and things like this, you can't spend all the wealth that you have. So has anyone got any insight on why they might be okay with this? Because there was one side that would say it's an individual thing, like it's your individual psychology that allows you to be able to, like, do you have to be a psychopath to be a billionaire, or is it more to do with the intrinsic aspects of capitalism?
Yeah, I think the website you're talking about is called Spend Bill Gates Money, something like that. I'm pretty sure it's Bill Gates who's in question. And I think on one level, you definitely have to be some sort of fucking psychopath to accumulate that much wealth, because it's not like billionaires are unaware of how exploitative their factories and working conditions are. When you see children mining lithium in the Democratic Republic of Congo, this isn't something that Elon Musk doesn't know about, obviously. He's a fucking CEO. He's in charge. He knows what's going on. It's sort of his job to understand what's going on and be making these sorts of deals. But you can't put it down entirely to one specific person, because you have to recognize that they're part of a system. They're part of the capitalist class, and as capitalists, their job is to make as much money as possible for other capitalists who own shares in the companies. So yeah, Jeff Bezos is a massive cunt, but at the same time, he is doing the job that he's been put in that position to do. So you can't blame just Jeff Bezos. You have to also look at the system as a whole, and the people who are investing in Amazon, hoping that their investments are going to make massive returns on what they've invested. So you have to be a cunt to be a billionaire, but at the same time, you have to be a cunt to be investing massive amounts of money in these companies, even if that doesn't necessarily net you $1 billion in returns. Maybe you're only making 500 million in returns from your investments. You have to be sort of a piece of shit to be investing on that sort of scale, because it's not like incredibly wealthy people don't recognize the harm that they're doing. They're very well aware of it. Just because members of the working class don't necessarily understand how exploitative the system is, it doesn't mean that the people at the head of capitalist society don't understand. They're fully aware, and most of them are fully engaged in these exploitative practices, but they just don't give a fuck, because all they care about is money.
I could say as well, it's almost, it's very much making all of this about, like Harley says, they are horrible people, but we've got to approach it in more of a way than just making this about personalities. It's not a personal sort of vendetta to accumulate all the wealth you want and to work hard. It's the system that creates that. We live in what we call a capitalist society, in which the profit motive is the most important thing. Someone that survives is someone that can make profit and make money, basically. So if you're starting out as Jeff Bezos, selling books or whatever, his online library, etc., bookstore, he realizes that there's someone else who's working his workers 3 hours more, less lunch breaks, sort of exploiting them more and more and more. If he doesn't step up to that plate and exploit his workers and sort of push his workers as far as he can, then he will not survive. And for him, surviving is everything. So obviously that goes all the way from the small companies all the way to the top. It's about surviving. So if someone's exploiting over here, you can try and be, as much as you want, a nice employer that treats everyone well. If someone is exploiting workers over there and can give products to people at cheaper prices than you can, you'll be out of the game. So you're forced to then exploit people and try and earn more wealth. And that's what happens all the way up to the top. And then when you're at the top, your job is just to gobble up everybody that you can to make sure that you'll exploit more people than anybody else will. Bill Gates, the reason Microsoft is so big is because they basically destroyed, litigate, or ate up any tech company that was in their way in the 90s to try and sort of get to the top. So it's less about personalities and less about the dog-eat-dog world that you're in. Like, you've got to keep finding ways to increase your profit margins, otherwise you die. That's basically what the system is.
I agree. I agree with both what you guys said. It's it's the name of the game. Competition is the name of the game, so you can't afford to be a nice guy if you want to accumulate this much wealth. And then once you do accumulate that much wealth, you're then not a nice guy by default anyway. by default having that. Just another point I wanted to talk about, which I thought would be interesting to get you guys' perspectives on. Have you noticed recently the kind of the way they've been trying to make these people like relatable, like trying to Elon Musk is like always on social media, on Twitter, on like podcasts, famous podcasts, smoking weed, like calling himself a socialist at one point, didn't he? Have you noticed like this trend? Because I think that they're trying to like normalize the idea of having that much money and make it seem like actually these guys, they're just these normal guys, man. They're just your mates from like down the pub. Like they're not actually these psychopathic fucking lizard people that they are. So what do you think about that? Does that piss any of you guys off as much as it pisses me off?
That literally have more than 1,000 million pounds. I think that's the point you have to keep reiterating that word to people, is that 1,000 million is just a crazy amount of money to have. And then you've got, like, in the run-up to the general election, 2019 general election, when Lloyd Russell Moyle, who's a Labour MP, went on 5 Live, and the BBC reporter was like, absolutely, I think she was called Emma Barnett, was absolutely shocked that he said that billionaires shouldn't exist. She was like, why? Why shouldn't billionaires exist? Like, that's a ridiculous thing to say. It's like, because they've got more than 1,000 million pounds. Like, it's a ridiculous amount of money that they literally can't spend on, if you're starting to find it difficult to spend your money, you've got too much money. And like we said, the reason they've got that money is because they've extracted it from people. And it's crazy that they're seen as, people see that I think people think they're more likely one day they could be a billionaire than they become homeless. Like, yeah, that's what they think.
Definitely. I don't know if it's, I was looking at this quote earlier and it attributed it to John Steinbeck, but I'm not sure if it's right. He said that socialism never took hold in America because the working people don't see themselves as a working class. They see themselves as temporarily embarrassed or inconvenienced millionaires. I think it was something along those lines. And I think that is true to an extent. I think people think they like the idea of possibly one day getting to that position.
Yeah, and I think what you were saying about how the media keeps trying to portray these people as like normal humans instead of terrifying alien space lizards here to extract all our blood. I think that ties in really well with what you've just said about how people perceive themselves as temporarily inconvenienced millionaires. It's because if there's a video somewhere of Bill Gates trying to guess the price of normal American foods that they have, and he's fucking clueless because he doesn't eat the same stuff as other people, not because he's an alien space reptile.
He eats flies.
but because, obviously people who are incredibly rich have very different diets from working class people. And I think that the media trying to portray them as if they're like some down-to-earth, relatable people is very important to maintain this idea that billionaires are just like normal people, and maybe one day you'll become a billionaire. Because I think if people woke up and realized that, we have billionaires, I think it's 8 people, the 8 richest people have the same amount of money as the 50% of the world's poorest. If people woke up and realized that, they wouldn't fucking stand for it because it's such an incredibly inhumane system. But in part because the media keeps portraying billionaires as just normal people and you can be one, I think that leads into the belief that, yeah, sure, I could be a millionaire one day. I've just got to work really hard and then I'll have a fucking $1 billion and I can do this, that, and the other, and oh, it'll be great. But the reality is, there's such a thin fucking chance that you'll ever even be a millionaire, let alone a billionaire or a trillionaire. And people are just so incredibly duped by the media into believing that they have a fucking shot at this, when the reality is that you don't. Cases where a working class person transcends class boundaries and becomes a millionaire, they're so incredibly rare. Like that, yeah, there are some figures who are always like lauded in the public eye, but they're so fucking minimal. 90% of the planet, if not more, are working class, and there's really just a handful of figures who have gone from being working class to millionaires. So I think it's part of the whole capitalist mythos of, hard work will make you a millionaire, when in reality, the people doing the hard work are the Amazon workers being paid $15 an hour and having to piss in bottles.
But even then, right, like you're talking about those few that do make it the way to the top. I was thinking about this about, so I was going to I'll come on to it in a bit about the fact that a lot of billionaires already come from privileged backgrounds anyway, and that gives them the foundations to which to build. But people like, say, Alan Sugar, that does claims he's from a working class background. Okay, all and good, he comes from a working class background. But what did he do once he started to amass wealth? He didn't. Not only did he start screwing over workers, he started making decisions that basically were like cheating the system to make sure you can't do it without screwing people over and cheating the system. You can't do it fairly. Like get to that sort of level of wealth, even if you come from like some working class background. It's never you do it through legitimate means. Like Alan Sugar, when the Premier League was formed and they were doing the TV rights, should the TV rights go for terrestrial TV so everyone can watch it, or should they go to Sky? The Premier League chairman voted on where the rights should go, and the deciding vote was Alan Sugar. And the reason he voted for them to go to Sky is because he made money off the satellites. Like that's the doors that it opens. The minute you start to have wealth, you can then create more wealth by having those doors open, if you know what I mean. But I was just going to say as well is that there's something else we wanted to talk about, that not only do they exploit workers and gain money, sort of discussion about the fact that once they have that money, they then begin to mold the political environment around them, these rich people, to grow their wealth. So they basically controlling the society's wealth gives them the right to plan economic activity. They fund think tanks, which then inform the media. They buy newspapers like The Sun to inform the debate that's on the BBC, and this idea that billionaires are okay. That's what they start to do with that money.
100%. It's not just, you say you can't spend all that money, and that's true, but you can buy a lot of influence with it. So I think the reason, what you were saying before, the reason that they just don't seem to care about exploitative practices is that they don't. They don't have to. They live on another stratosphere of influence and wealth and policy making. Rupert Murdoch has had more to do with, legislation in the UK than any member of Parliament has, I'd wager. He affects it so much, and passively, I'd say, but I'd put quotes on passively, because it's active encouragement within the system. He's not a member, but I think his papers, I'm not sure how many he owns in the UK, but it's an awful lot, and the same in Australia. They encourage, they give the basis of political thought for people that vote for lawmakers, and those lawmakers are bound by the decisions of their constituents. You are able to buy tremendous amounts of influence beyond any material thing you could use. They don't need to. Just having that wealth, I think even if they could spend it all, they wouldn't want to, because then you lose the influence and the ability to influence others.
There's a book called Billionaires and Stealth Politics that came out in 2018, and it basically says that there's two types of billionaires. You've got what you describe as your Koch brother billionaires, who are invested in all sorts, but I think they're mainly invested in oil companies in America. They're the stark example of two billionaires that have got their fingers in many political pies. If you sort of follow the money from these groups, far right and right wing libertarian think tanks, which then inform, and lobby groups that inform politics, they fund campaigns for political candidates and political parties. It sort of starts to find all its way up to the Koch brothers, and they do that in the open. They do it very public. Then you get billionaires like Bill Gates, who in public don't really talk about politics that much. They don't confess their politics. When he got asked, would he rather have Trump or Elizabeth Warren as president, Bill Gates said, "Oh, I'll choose the candidate that looks like they're going to do the best jobs." It's very much staying middle of the road. What they actually do behind closed doors is push for policies that are going to help their business, help the capital of Microsoft and themselves. So there's sort of two types of billionaires. There's ones that are screwing and rigging the system in public, or they're screwing the system and rigging it behind closed doors. But either way, they are rigging the political system to pay for people's campaigns and pay for. And I think that the important thing is paying for think tanks, which create reports that get on BBC News, like the Taxpayers Alliance, who are always on Question Time in the UK, always on Daily Politics, and they're backed by people that have got money in the Bahamas. They get loads of money from far right think tanks in America, and they're literally on the BBC every day on some sort of topical news program, and they're spouting bollocks about. Basically, they're meant to be talking about scrutinising how governments spend tax money, but they actually just want tax breaks for the wealthy who are funding their jobs.
Yeah. So wealth isn't just for spending on nice things, nice luxury goods. It's also about power, and maybe that explains the hoarding thing that I was talking about as well. Maybe that explains why they have so much money at their disposal, because then it gives them options and like power to maneuver in the political sphere and protect the wealth that they do have as well.
You know, if you're giving great customer experience, there's the only way to do that is with happy people.
So yeah, we do sort of want to talk about, touched on it a little bit before, talk about the fact that going back to how billionaires get their wealth. So we've decided that they exploit their workers. That's one thing. They create an environment in which they fund political candidates and fund political organisations, which create an environment that helps their businesses, their political interests, which helps them ultimately accumulate more and more wealth. So once you're in the door, you've exploited your workers, you do that. But to go right back to the start, the fact that, you know, a lot of these people that are billionaires come from incredibly privileged backgrounds to begin with. Like we talked about Jeff Bezos a lot. I mean, he started Amazon after having a £250,000 donation.
Yeah, it was more than that. It was more than that as well.
Yeah, it's basically hundreds of thousands of pounds from his parents given to him in 1995 to set up an online bookstore. Well, no shit that he did all right then. I mean, quarter of a million's a long way from a trillion, but you know, if you gave me a $250,000, you just buy a fuckload of houses, become a landlord, you turn that into $1 million in no time. Piece of piss. Once you've got money, it's a piece of piss making it.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I mean, obviously there's numerous other examples. Elon Musk's family owns an emerald mine, you know.
Oh yeah, they made a lot off apartheid, didn't they?
Yeah, because, you know, of course, everyone's dad owns an emerald mine. But yeah, it's this idea that, again, going back to the fact that, well, we've earned it and we're the people that have worked hard. It's just a complete myth.
Well, I think for transparency, we do have to admit that we are being funded by Soros. This podcast is being funded by George Soros. It'd be pretty rude of us not to mention that.
Just got my most recent check from Soros Bucks. Rolling in it, lads, not going to lie.
That's nice.
I think we would be on that sort of money if we just stopped eating avocados and going to Starbucks.
That's the problem with us, whatever we are, Gen X generations. I know what we are. But yeah, the other thing I wanted to say as well is the fact that, and this is covered in the Entrepreneurial State by Mariana Mazzucato, which is a lot of words for me to say.
Bless you.
Yeah, he talks about
sounds like a pudding.
He talks about in his book that most of these businesses and these technological geniuses that run these businesses, a lot of those things that have been created come from military research and development projects, like, you know, all the bits of the smartphone that make it smart. You know, Steve Jobs is this genius creating the iPhone. GPS, touchscreen, and the internet were all advanced by the American Defense Department. Tesla's battery technologies and solar panels come out of a grant from the US Department of Energy. Google search engine algorithm was boosted by a national science foundation. So all of these things that people are heralded for working hard and being geniuses because they run Tesla, they run Google, they run Apple, normally come from state-funded projects. I know they're funded for the wrong reasons because they're normally funded for war, but this idea that, going back to why we're socialists, is that we think that the state can create these things. It can be entrepreneurial, whatever that is. So again, it goes back to this idea that these people aren't geniuses because most of the technology that's been created they didn't do it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to be to bring up. Really, is that there's this capitalist mythology that these people are super hardworking and they're all self-made millionaires with no input from anyone else. It's all the result of the hard work that they've done. But the reality is that the state sector has massively invested in so many different companies. And if you look at a company if you look at someone who's made their money off of oil, for example, the UK and the US, they give fucking thousands of millions of pounds or dollars, respectively, to these oil companies as basically just handouts. They're just giving them free fucking cash. They call them subsidies, but ultimately what it is free money for these businesses to use to expand their business network. And obviously when a business expands, it means it's going to bring in more dividends for its shareholders. So I really find it hard to believe how some people look at this and say, yes, this is a free market. This is a completely free market. And these billionaires, they've made their money off their own hard work. There's been no involvement from anyone else. And we need to get rid of the state, which is in the way. And I just find libertarians fucking baffling because their view of the world is so out of sync with reality. It's billionaires. They're not some magical geniuses who have done a ton of hard work and a ton of innovation. They're basically just leeching off the fucking state, and we don't need them. We don't need them to innovate. The state is funding most of this innovation anyway.
So on the British example of that, you're not going to get more of a leech than Richard Branson, who is almost it's the British version of Steve Jobs almost. He's got this reputation because of Virgin Records and that they had loads of amazing band sites and that he's sort of this like hippie down to earth guy. But like you were saying there, a lot of his wealth now is backed off British taxpayer initiative money. And the worst case of it, and especially when people bang on about the market knows best, the state can't do things, is train lines and Virgin Trains. If I want to go from Worcester to Birmingham, there's only one train track that can take me there and one type of train. There's no choice there. I can't choose which train I want to go and take. So, there's no. I don't want to talk in market terms, but there's no reason there for them to offer me a good service at a good price because they've got no competitors. Because there's one track and they run it. They've got the contract for it. They can do what they want. And the beauty of that is not only do they have that, we pay for the fucking rail lines. The British taxpayer pay to keep the stations maintained. They pay to keep the rail lines maintained. If anything goes wrong and they make a loss, they ask for a fucking handout. Like Virgin Airline are asking for a handout now. It's an absolute joke.
750 million or something, wasn't it? That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that about the railways, because like the argument for privatizing anything really, but like the railways, having privatized rail network is that it increases choice and increases efficiency and prices will be better. It's one of the most expensive. It's one of my highest expenses when the trains are running is trains. Like they're awful. They're delayed every single time I get a train, and there is no choice. You're right. Yeah, you have to get a train when you need to get a train. So like that is a really good example. And then Buddy Branson has the nerve to ask us for money to bail out. Well, that wasn't for the Virgin Trains, but for Virgin Airline or whatever. Yeah, bastard. I hate him.
And Can we also just say that Kant's tried to sue the NHS on several occasions?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well.
And also, when he loses, if he ever loses a contract for the railways, he tries to sue National Rail as well. Like basically, if he doesn't get a contract, he tries to sue the government, the taxpayers that already subsidise him to live on an actual island. In which also on that island, and you can research this yourself, listener, because I haven't. I'm just fucking shooting from the hip here. I'm pretty sure he did some didn't he push an indigenous community off the island that he occupied for his house? I'm
I
pretty
want to
sure.
say.
It's Necker Island, isn't it? Yeah, I think he did.
There's something horrific that he did.
Are we
on
talking
those
about the
lines.
same island? Because I'm talking about a place in Hawaii.
No, Necker Island's off. I don't know where it is. It's
Either way,
somewhere in the middle of the sea.
The whole point goes back to the fact that we can discuss someone owning an island is ridiculous in itself. When you've list any world food banks in Britain, I mean, lack of clean drinking water in America, whatever. And it's just it all feeds into that. And it's a difficult, a very, very difficult narrative to combat. That people seem to be bothered more about like the Forbes rich list than people going hungry in Britain. Like, do you know what I mean? It's almost like a spectacle. How much can someone earn?
It's like it's like a Premier League sort of table. There's people on Reddit, which I'm sorry is the worst health site in the world, who are just like so ingrained in their support of Elon Musk. Like anytime he gains a dollar, they just go insane. They just
Elon Musk in
Please let me lick
particular.
your boots.
Yeah,
Elon Musk
they line up to lick the boots, exactly.
It seems like I don't know why it's him, but it seems there's a specific strain of person that
it's space.
I know that person, but I don't know. I know people that I knew from school who did like business degree or like did business at A level and maybe did a business degree or a business type degree, and they absolutely love him, and he's a fucking idiot.
They probably think they're gonna get there one day. That's probably why.
But he constantly just spouts things on Twitter that are either wrong. I mean, his funniest ones being Marx is actually a capitalist. He wrote a book in that way.
That's the easiest way to tell that he's never read anything by Marx. Marx is a capitalist.
Or it's a good troll.
Also, him correcting his wife, so Grimes, who is actually a fairly decent artist, beyond the point. She gave birth. she gave birth to their son, whose name I cannot pronounce. And she sort of it's like XAE-12 is the name.
Spy Plane Child.
Yeah, Spy Plane Child, and she attempted to explain. She attempted to explain like what each like character meant, and he corrected her. Like he was like, well, actually, it's this plane, not that plane. She was like, well. And this played out on Twitter as well. It wasn't even in person. It was over Twitter. She was like, "Well, actually,
like days after she
yeah, like apparently she nearly died in childbirth as well. Like she was under heavy medication and like recovering. And he was like, "All right, well, actually, it's this plane, not this plane."
The fact he's nearly incriminated himself quite a few times on Twitter. I mean, one time, sort of go back to before, he tweeted something about the Tesla workers who are also working in horrific circumstances, wanting to unionize, and he did a tweet that was like, why would you want to unionize and lose your healthcare benefits and your shares in the company? And he basically was saying, if you unionize, we'll take away the scheme where you can buy shares. And then a California judge was like, yeah, that's illegal. There's actually no rules. There's no fine in place. There's no fine system if you break those trade union, like the union laws. You just basically just get told, don't do that again. And then he also said that Tesla was worth a lot more. He also said that Tesla was worth a lot more than it is on Twitter, and all of his fucking people
a lot more than it should be.
Yeah, but people that fucking stand him really hard were like, "You just lost me £100,000, you fucking."
Yeah.
Like, and they still love him.
I mean, they're turning against him, aren't they, lately, because of his insistence that California opened the Tesla plant. He said, "Oh, I'll be on the front lines with any worker." He wasn't. Like the day the Tesla factory opened, he just wasn't there.
Speaking of bootlicking, have you heard something that just bangs around on the internet quite a bit? Have you heard of donation shaming? This new concept. There's basically, I don't know like how into YouTube you guys are, but this one big YouTuber, I'm not particularly into it, but one big YouTuber was criticizing Jeff Bezos for only donating 100 million he donated to help fight coronavirus. I think it was, which is like a just minute fraction of his.
It's like £6 or less than £6 to us mortals.
Yeah, so like, yeah, and everyone, and then so he criticized this, and everyone in the replies is just like, don't donation shame him. Do you realize he just donated £100 million? And it's like, oh, for God's sake, you really just don't get it, do you? Like, donation shame? What?
It's so ironic. Like he could do a fundraiser for mistreated Amazon employees and raise a bunch of money, and then he'd still, you could call him up like, well, you're the one that did that in the first place. They'd be like, wow, he raised this much money for mistreated Amazon employees, dude. So, well, it's systematic, you fucking penis.
Yeah, they're paying for they're exploiting their workers who, as a result, then need to, I don't know, go to food banks or whatever, and then he donates to the food bank. It's like, brilliant. Well, I mean, if you could have fucking paid them in the first place. And that's the system that they live in. I mean, Bill Gates, when he was getting questioned about around the time when America was having a discussion about should billionaires exist, after AOC said that her line of every billionaire is a policy disaster. And he said, oh yeah, if you tax me a couple of billion, I'm fine with that. If you start taxing me 100 billion, I've got to start counting the pennies. And everyone was like, you still have 2 billion left. You still have 2,000 million pounds in which you've had it all these years already. So what were you doing? You clearly haven't found ways to spend it. And it goes back to, Clement Attlee's quote of, charity is a cold, grey, loveless thing. If a rich man wants to help the poor, he should pay his taxes gladly, not dole out money at a whim. It's this idea that charity isn't something that should be praised. They've exploited workers to get it in the first place. They've then made political donations which help them get more money. And then they decide they dole a bit out here and there to make themselves look good.
I'm just going to say,
since we've mentioned taxes, do we want to give a shout out to the Panama Papers, which showed that actually a significant portion of billionaires aren't paying fucking anything in taxes to begin with because they've all got offshore accounts where they funnel their cash to? And also, for the record, several people who worked on the journals and releasing the Panama Papers, essentially, several of them have died in mysterious circumstances, and I'm not going to name any names of people who I think are suspects in the murders, but I think it's awfully suspicious that people who have exposed billionaires for not paying taxes have mysteriously died after releasing that report. I think it really goes to show some of the shadier shit that billionaires are up to, and companies as a whole. If we look at Coca-Cola, they've murdered union organizers. And if we look at United Fruit Company, which I think is called Chiquitos now, they've toppled entire Latin American governments to get cheap bananas. And I think there's a great intersection between billionaires and the worst excesses of the capitalist system. It's easy to say, oh, America is evil, which for the record it is, but it's easy to say that America is evil and act like America alone is doing all this shady stuff in Latin America or it topples governments. But the reality is that it's doing this on behalf of the capitalist class who need to find cheap labor and cheap natural resources to continue making their absurd amounts of money. And it's so completely fucked. And I just get so pissed off whenever I see anyone standing for America because I fucking hate America.
Death to America, of course.
Death to America. That should be the tagline of every episode, to be honest.
I think one thing I find really interesting is how this culture is of billionaires and defending billionaires, justifying it. It's like they've been billionaires for a while, but it's relatively new, isn't it? And it shows like the sort of rapid decline of capitalism because the wealth gap wealth inequality is going through the roof. You get there's more billionaires than there's ever has been in the past. They're growing daily, well, probably not daily, but it shows like the difference between like the post-war consensus. I'm not saying that things were good then, they certainly weren't, but they were sort of like it's a completely different era now.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it before, the Panama Papers, and talk about tax avoidance. That I think the best quote that I saw, and I don't know where I read it from because I've never been able to find it since, that Apple as an organization, I mean, there was that year where they were like basically the biggest company on record, and that Apple is a tax avoiding company that happens to make iPhones. Like their job, the thing that makes them money is actually avoiding tax, and that as a byproduct they just create phones and a few products. Like they are designed to avoid tax on a mass scale to accumulate as much wealth as possible. Hence why in 2015 they paid £13 million in tax in the UK, despite global profits of 35 billion. Amazon paid 220 million pounds worth of tax in Britain, despite a revenue in Britain of 10.9 billion. And Microsoft avoid paying around 100 million pounds in tax a year. In the UK, they put their offices in Ireland, and in the US, they put their offices in Puerto Rico. So again, Bill Gates seen as a great man, Steve Jobs seen as a great man. They're purposely taking money away from the services that are helping people and sort of, you know, the NHS, whatever. And they're doing it on a mass scale. And the Panama Papers showed that it's a very organized, down to a T, you know, money laundering system.
We live in a bloody hellscape, and things are
We live in a
definitely getting worse.
society.
Like, do you guys think that we're beyond the peak of capitalism, aren't we? We're beyond the, not peak as in how bad things could get. I mean, the golden era. Things have now started going the other way rapidly.
Mate,
like,
we live in the fucking book of Revelations at this point.
But I get what you mean. How far we are, even from, the 1950s, in which the New Deal was in swing. Again, these aren't great things that should be praiseworthy. We're just saying that the fact that we're so far away in our society from even that.
That was the best that capitalism had to offer.
And after 15, 16, 20 years of it, they went, meh, had enough of this now. They sort of, these working class people keep piping up a bit too much, so we're gonna do something else. But yeah, well, it's fucked, isn't it?
And we are going back to our roots. We're going back to our roots because the tree of capitalism is rotten and is falling and will bring us down with it.
So as a final bit to the podcast, we thought we'd do something called Argument Ammunition, which I have 100% stolen from a podcast called The Lockdown, which is a prison abolition podcast, by the way, if you want to listen to it. It's on Navara. It's the idea that basically I'm thinking it's a post-quarantine lockdown barbecue. Uncle Knobheads took you to one side. He's seen your Facebook posts, all this red in the face bollocks, and you're a lefty. And he's got a couple of questions he wants to ask you about the world because, you know, he read Atlas Shrugged when he was 16, that sort of thing. So, question one, whoever wants to take this on. So I'm going to be the devil's advocate, Uncle Knobhead. If they've earned it, I don't get why billionaires shouldn't just be allowed to keep it.
Well, it's what we were talking about earlier. What is earned? Where do we place the value of something? Do we base it on who has the capital, so who has the deeds to a company? I have to think of an example. Let's bring it down to, like, I was watching some lecture earlier, and the guy doing the lecture brings it down to smaller level, and he talks about like a factory that's making toothbrushes. I think he talks about. So where do we get the like where do we base our wages? Like, what do we base our wages on? Is it if you have a piece of paper in your pocket that says you own the factory? Is that where you get it from, or do you get it from? Where else can you get value from? The amount of effort or work or labor you put into making a product, making the toothbrush in this example, to base it off that. Like, where do we base it off? And then so if we base it in a capitalist system, we obviously base it off the first example. If you have the capital in a company, you get to decide the profits that you make from it. Is that fair, that because you own the means of production that you then get to get an excessive amount of profits? So I think earned is a dodgy word, because I don't think you can earn that amount of money at all by any amount of hard work. You could build the next pyramids of Giza by yourself, and it wouldn't be worth the amount of money that some of these people earn.
That's the thing, is that earns the loaded term in that. And in that, if, you know, yeah, okay, you say the toothbrush factory, because you've got a piece of paper saying you own a factory, that won't create wealth on its own. But if you put people in it that turn raw materials into a product that you then sell, which then gives you money. Who's created that money there? It's those people that have come into that space, onto that land to create a product that they can sell on and make you money. So who's creating that? It's the workers. They would be nothing. These people would be nothing without people creating things for them. Therefore, we as socialists, the belief is those people that are creating that wealth should receive the money and not that we don't want profits, but the
value of labour.
Yeah, the value that is created from that process goes back into the people that created that wealth. It doesn't just go upwards to somebody that happens to own the piece of paper with a factory on.
Because otherwise, it's slavery. It's wage slavery. It's a different form of slavery. If you're not getting the value of the profits that you're creating with your labor, then you're enslaved. Because you're not being properly compensated for something that you've done. So that is the definition of slavery. It's just a different type. It's obviously not the same as chattel slavery, but it's.
But you have no option within this economic system to do that. You have to sell your labor for a wage, otherwise you cannot survive. So you have to sell your labor to the man that has the piece of paper that owns the factory, so you can eat food, hopefully have somewhere to live, etc.
That's the problem I have with people who say, if you don't like it, just get another job, or you can choose where to work. No, you can't. Look at how many people are actually searching for a job, and will take the bare minimum. I mean, a lot of the time doesn't even get their needs met. They just need some sort of income. It's such a fallacy to say that you have a choice of where to work, as if employment arbitrage actually exists and you can compare workplaces among each other. I'm sure people in the middle and upper classes can, but for the people in the working class that actually just need a means to survive, yes, they have a choice, but the choice is working under exploitative conditions or dying on the street.
Yeah, 100%. I think we've done a lot there. We've done a lot in our Uncle Knobhead's gone a little bit quiet, but he's still got some questions coming at us. He's had a beer and he's come back for round 2.
He's got himself a hot dog.
Yeah, he's got a hot dog in hand. He's got. I'm thinking. I'm going to say Stella. He's not even put it in a bucket of water. He's just having it room temp. He's that sort of prick.
The aunt's rolling her eyes and sort of looking over.
So he's coming back over and he says, "Okay, so if we tax billionaires, won't they just move their business elsewhere? And therefore, you've got people losing their jobs. We therefore can't get money from tax revenues, and actually." Taxing them and taking lots of money away from them is going to affect working class people as well as the rest of the country.
I think, first of all, the straight up answer to that is no. If you look at countries that do have higher tax rates than what we do here in the UK or in the US, they do still have those businesses operating there. France has a higher corporate tax rate than the UK, but Amazon still does stuff in France. Apple still does stuff in France. It's not like the company is going to say, oh, well, I guess I won't try and make a profit there because they'll take a slightly larger share of my profits through taxation. But I think also saying that we're talking about taxation is in a large way misrepresenting the argument of socialists. Obviously, there are people who call themselves socialists who say, yeah, we just need to tax the rich some more. But personally, that's not what I stand for, because I think that you create this situation where all you're doing really is taking a slight portion of this massive amount of wealth. You're taking a slight portion, but you're not fundamentally stopping the massive exploitation that goes on to create that wealth in the first place. And if you really want to be pessimistic about it, if you take a larger portion of their wealth, they're going to have to ramp up the exploitation. So if you tax Apple 50%, instead of the current conditions in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where children have died mining lithium, they're going to have to ramp up their exploitation to keep up their rate of profit and to keep satisfying their investors. So taxing them, firstly, it's not going to make them move their business interests elsewhere, because that's just not what happens. Secondly, as the Panama Papers showed, a lot of billionaires and a lot of companies don't really pay taxes to begin with. And thirdly, saying that we're talking about taxation is quite a big misrepresentation of the argument of a lot of socialists.
I think that's a really good point that I hadn't actually thought about that much. The idea that, taxation isn't the sort of the silver bullet for socialists. I think in terms of, if you're just thinking of the here and now and you're thinking, you're sort of giving them maybe the pessimist view, the optimist view then would be, well, if we can just tax enough, well, then we can fund the social services that we want that can help working class people. And if the idea is, right, if you tax them too high, they'll move. The idea that they will leave a market as big as Britain to go elsewhere is just an absolute fantasy. I mean, they're sending their kids to Eton, they're sending their kids to Oxford and Cambridge, that are some of the best universities in the world. We fund the rail service that we fund the lines for the rail service that get workers to work. We have a national health service that keeps their workforce healthy for them. We have lots of things that make it very easy to earn money in Britain. We have very, very low corporation tax. I mean, our corporation tax, what Jeremy Corbyn was offering to put the corporation tax up to was a lot lower than what Thatcher had the corporation tax at in the 80s. Like, so we've got this system that's very conducive towards these people doing well. The idea that if you tax them a little bit more, they'll get up and leave is just, it's an absolute bollocks.
Also, for the record, I want to say that if they do get up and leave, that doesn't mean that they're not going to take the factories with them. They can't physically carry a warehouse over to the Bahamas where they don't have to pay taxes, So if hypothetically billionaires did all get up and leave because we decided to tax them more, it's not like the actual material things that built their wealth have suddenly gone. They're not bringing their workers with them. They're not bringing the factories with them. They're not bringing the warehouses with them. A socialist economy would simply say, okay, well, there's a ton of empty factories and warehouses, and there's a ton of people looking for work. Let's put them to work in these factories, and we'll start working for the good of society as a whole instead of the profits of shareholders. And it kind of baffles me that some people think this is an incredibly complex situation. I suppose it is when you're talking about in real terms, in terms of what's actually politically possible. But on the basis of things, seizing the means of production is not that complicated of a concept. I
like that idea that basically the answer is, one, they are very unlikely to leave and take everything with them, as in their money. But two, if they did leave, it's actually, there's this idea that there's an opportunity there for a socialist alternative to be created, which happened in Venezuela. There was a cereal factory where I don't know if it was Kellogg's, I'm not actually sure, but it was an international like cereal producer had a factory in Venezuela because of the revolution and some changes, obviously, with the economy. They withdrew their business from that factory, and the workers just continued the line anyway and just created the cereal as normal. So
yeah, exactly.
The idea is they did just fuck off and leave. You just continue doing what you did before, but then it doesn't go to CEO dickhead off in the Bahamas. It goes towards all of you people who were in that factory and creating, in this case, your cornflakes. Right. Good. Okay. We'll go on to another one. We'll move on. He's on the ropes, Uncle Knobhead, but he's not knocked out yet. Bill Gates and Bezos donate lots of money to good causes. Shouldn't that be praised?
No, it's not the point. It's systematic exploitation. So they take so much, as we've spoken about the whole episode, they take so much money off people, and then they give it. So they take so much money off poor people, and they give a certain amount back.
They sort of dribble bits back here and there.
Different or sometimes the same poor people. It's like when a workplace does a whip round for someone who's off sick or something. It's like, well, shouldn't you just be paying them, better benefits when they're sick, rather than make your employees chip in to fund them?
I think it comes back to what we said about when we spoke about in our coronavirus episode about the clap for carers. I think someone mentioned the idea that the clapping was a way of like clapping away the collective guilt that people felt about doing the bad thing of voting in the Tories. This idea of philanthropy of billionaires just seems like a way of covering up all the dodgy things they do to the workers. I mean, things like the Bill Gates Foundation are heavily, despite him going to the World Economic Forum and banging about climate change and how important it is, like he's some savior, he's massively invested in fossil fuel companies. Like Bill Gates Foundation, this charity, is hugely invested in the arms trade and fossil fuels. So it just seems like it's a cover and a way of just trying to make themselves feel better for being utter pricks.
Yeah, and a PR stunt as well, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if we're talking about it as a PR stunt, it's working exactly as intended, because now as soon as you criticize Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos, someone's like, oh, but he donates a lot of money to charity. It's like it's a means to deflect any and all criticism of them. If you talk about the horrible conditions in Amazon factories, you know some fucking libertarian chud is going to pop up and say, but he donates some money, actually. I think you'll find that makes him good. And it's fucking bullshit, basically.
And it goes back to what we were saying before, like this the bootlicking of trying to defend these people who, the best reply is every time someone says something nice about Elon Musk and someone's like, he's not going to fuck you, mate. Like, so just let it go.
It's like drill. Sorry.
No, go on.
I was going to say, it's like Drill says, at Drill on Twitter. He says, there's zero difference between good and bad things, you fucking idiots.
Okay, right. So we've sort of covered that one. Right. If this will be a very hot topic for libertarians and sort of right-wing thinkers. If you have billionaires that spend their wealth, does it not trickle down and benefit society through tax revenues and creating jobs? So if you have, the argument would be, I don't know, take Jeff Bezos buying his £80 million mansion. That required a big workforce to build that mansion, who are then getting paid. You can then put food on the table, blah, 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 blah. The wealth that he's accumulated trickles back down into the system, either through tax revenues or by him spending money directly helps people. What would we say for people to combat that?
Well, no one's claiming that they don't create jobs, that they don't pay people's wages. It's just that they pay them the minimum amount so that they will continue working there, not somewhere else. That is, as much as they're willing to give. In terms of creating jobs, they're creating insecure work, low-paid work, like we were talking about Elon Musk earlier. If you unionize, we'll fire you or whatever. How's that creating? You can create jobs in different ways. It doesn't have to come at the dole and at the whim of billionaires.
Like Morgan said, precisely, it's not that they don't stimulate economic activity in any way. I think it'd be a complete fallacy to say that billionaires, when they spend money and when businesses expand, it doesn't stimulate economic activity. But the fact is, you don't need them in the picture to do this. If you look at, any country that has a state sector of any description, you'll see that the state is perfectly capable of funding and stimulating economic activity. So I think the real difference is that if you look at Jeff Bezos and his new mansion or whatever, and yeah, sure, there are workers building a mansion and stuff, but then in the end, who gets to experience the benefit of that economic activity? Yeah, the workers get paid and stuff, but all they've done is build a mansion for some rich fuck to live in. Wouldn't it be more productive to pay those same workers to build something like a public park or any sort of public good, a hospital or a school, something that people other than one person who has an absurd amount of wealth can actually tangibly use in their lifetime?
No, yeah, 100%. I think the other one that we had was, and I mean, we sort of answered a bit in the first one, but I don't know if there's anything that anybody wanted to expand on it, is that you say that it's the workers that create the wealth. If the likes of Musk, etc., didn't provide them a factory to work in, they wouldn't have a job. Then if we sort of covered that in the first one, I don't know if there's anything that anybody thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, it is exactly like we said in response to the first question. We brought a real world example where the factory was there and the workers took it. But, you could still make the argument that, Kellogg's built that factory. The fact is, Kellogg's didn't really do that much. It wasn't this absurd, it wasn't this abstract concept of capital that built the factory. If you look at it on a material level, it's people putting bricks together who built the factory. It's workers working in the supply chains who brought the bricks from one place to another to build the factory. It's people who built the machinery that goes in that factory. So yes, of course it's the capital invested by Kellogg's that builds the cereal factory. But what the point is, why should it be that we have to rely on businesses to invest capital in things? Because if we rely on businesses to be the foundation of our economic system, we'll find that things that aren't profitable don't get invested in. So if you look at healthcare in pretty much any global south country, it's pretty fucking pitiful. And it's not a surprise that companies aren't investing massively there because they realize they can make a lot more money investing in other things. So we sort of we're put at the mercy of capitalists, and the fact is they don't really care about funding social care, or they don't care about funding hospitals out of the good of their heart. They will only do what is required to make money. And this is why you get a situation like in America where healthcare is so heavily privatized. You see people come out with like a birth costing $30,000, you know. It costs you $30,000 to give birth to a child. It's ridiculous. And I don't see why there is any sort of debate around the fact that this is some sort of necessary evil when it's been perfectly demonstrated throughout history that, you know, there are perfectly good alternatives to this. There are ways that the state itself can invest this capital that's necessary.
Yeah, and more often, I was just going to say on the initial point, more often not, like we said, the capital is inherited anyway. The initial capital to be able to create these jobs or whatever is inherited anyway. We were ready to do away with inherited power, like how many 100 years ago? 300 years ago, 200 to 300. Why are we not ready to do away with inherited wealth? Because wealth is power anyway.
And I think that's just to drive home that example. I think I want to say 10, but it's some of the richest families in Italy. They've been the same families since the 16th century, round about there. So it really shows that, you know, wealth, it doesn't all flow and trickle equally into society like people seem to be implying. It actually stays concentrated in these very small groups of people.
Just as a going back to, it actually was a Kellogg's factory in Venezuela. And if you want a very funny 5 minutes, just search the word Kellogg's factory Venezuela, and the way that they report it is absolutely hilarious. That Maduro has seized the Kellogg's, has forced Kellogg's out of the country and has seized it and given it to the basically what's the unauthorized and illegitimate appropriation of Kellogg's in Venezuela. Basically, Kellogg's got up and left because they didn't. They basically, Venezuela weren't playing to their tune as a big corporation, and when they left, Maduro just said, the workers that are already there can run it.
How exciting is that? That just excites me, that headline. Just,
that's basically what happened. But it's made out that big bad Maduro has chased the fucking Kellogg's chicken out of town. And yeah, it's just very funny.
I think we can't be relying on big cereal anymore. It's too big. Big cereal.
Cereal, the monopoly of Kellogg's must be broken. I mean, that's just a red in the face fact. Cornflakes is shite anyway.
So true.
Oh, hard disagree with you, but carry on. So
no, that's all I had in terms of our argument ammunition. Hopefully that will help people next time you've got either with Harley at 4 a.m. on a Reddit, whatever they're called, subreddit. I don't delve into that shit. Or you've got Uncle Nobody at a barbecue. You can tell him straight why Bezos is a little bitch.
Oi, you! Shut your mouth and look at my wad! Loads of money!
This is a journey into money. Loads of money. I know. It's loads of money.
What's they spell? Loads of money! Probably.
Made a right load of finishing knowledge this week.
Right, lads, what's out for the ladies? Loads of.